It started with a headline that sounded almost impossible. UK Parliament moves to strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of royal titles. King Charles to approve. In just 2 minutes, every major network lit up. Phones buzzed, news alerts screamed across the world, and inside Buckingham Palace, the echoes of centuries-old tradition collided with modern rebellion. Could it really be happening? Could the once celebrated royal couple who vowed to step back now be stripped of everything, officially, publicly, and permanently? For years, whispers of royal disgrace have lingered like a storm cloud. But this time, it wasn't the tabloids stirring drama. It was the British Parliament, the very institution that represents the will of the people. And when Parliament speaks, even kings listen. The timing couldn't have been more brutal. Just days after new polls revealed record-low public trust in the Sussexes, lawmakers convened a private meeting that, according to insiders, shook the walls of Westminster. What followed was a motion that could change royal history forever. Pause for a moment and imagine this. A monarchy that has survived abdications, wars, divorces, and scandals, now debating, in the open, whether to strip the son of the king and his American wife of their royal birthright. It sounds like fiction, doesn't it? But this time, it's very real. And the irony couldn't be deeper. The same institution that once protected the crown's reputation is now being asked to defend it from within. The House of Commons wasn't just voting on titles. It was voting on what it means to be royal in the modern age. So why now? What pushed lawmakers to finally act after years of rumors, interviews, and royal rifts? The answer is complicated, and it begins not with politics, but with fatigue. Public fatigue. The kind that brews slowly, like a pot left on the stove too long. Each tell-all interview, each Netflix documentary, each veiled accusation chipped away at the fairy tale. What began as fascination turned to frustration, and finally, fury. Even loyal royalists started asking, how long can this go on? How long can the monarchy remain silent while its name is dragged through the mud by its own? Behind closed doors, aides whispered that King Charles had reached his breaking point weeks ago. Advisors reportedly described him as visibly strained, tired of being humiliated, and ready to let Parliament take the lead. It's rare for a monarch to let politicians decide royal fate, but in this case, it was a strategic masterstroke. By allowing Parliament to act first, Charles could appear neutral. He could be the king who respected democracy, while quietly watching others do what he could not publicly do himself. But the real question that keeps echoing through Britain is this: who started the fire? Some say it was the BBC expose on royal funding tied to Sussex business ventures. Others blame Meghan's fiery speech in New York, where she allegedly mocked certain royal rules as outdated symbols of oppression. Whatever the trigger, the fuse was lit. The Parliament's agenda shifted almost overnight. Within hours, a motion titled Restoration of Royal Integrity Act appeared on the docket. And yes, that was the actual name proposed by one MP. Subtle? Not even close. Symbolic? Absolutely. As the story broke, the streets of London buzzed. Tourists gathered outside Westminster, phones raised, as if history were unfolding live on their screens, and in a way, it was. Inside, members of Parliament debated not just the Sussexes, but what they represented. Were Harry and Meghan victims of an outdated institution? Or architects of their own downfall? Every speech grew more charged. Some called it justice. Others, cruelty. One MP from Yorkshire reportedly stood up and said, "This isn't about punishment, it's about preservation." That line, within minutes, became the quote of the hour. And while Parliament debated, Buckingham Palace maintained its trademark silence. The King's press secretary offered a single, cryptic line: "His Majesty is aware of Parliament's deliberations." That was all it took for social media to explode. Some interpreted it as tacit approval. Others saw it as distance, a father refusing to intervene in his son's undoing. But those who know Charles best say that behind palace doors, the silence was far from calm. Reports claim he spent the evening pacing the private gardens, clutching letters from his sons written years ago, long before the family fractured. The symbolism is haunting. A father watching a government decide his son's royal fate, powerless to stop it. And yet, some would argue he's not powerless at all. As sovereign, Charles must give final approval for any bill affecting the royal titles. Parliament can propose, debate, and vote, but the king must sign. The ink, they say, will dry only when his heart allows it. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle reportedly spent the morning on the phone with legal advisors and PR specialists. A source close to her circle allegedly claimed, she wasn't surprised, she was furious. Furious that the institution she tried to outshine was now turning the lights off for good. Furious that the same public that once adored her as a modern princess was now cheering for her downfall. And perhaps most of all, furious that this time, she couldn't control the narrative. This wasn't a tabloid rumor, it was legislative reality. For Prince Harry, the mood was said to be somber, reflective, almost defeated. According to insiders, he received word from a friend in London moments before the announcement hit. Those who've spoken to him say he spent hours replaying old clips, the wedding, the balcony waves, his grandmother's smile. It was nostalgia mixed with regret, the kind that cuts deep. He knew this day might come, one source said. He just never thought it would come this fast. But this story isn't just about two people losing titles. It's about what those titles meant to the British public and how far the nation is willing to go to protect its traditions. Because the monarchy, love it or hate it, isn't just a family, it's a symbol. And symbols only survive when people believe in them. The problem? The Sussex saga made too many stop believing. For Parliament, that was unforgivable. There's a line from a royal historian that resonates here. The British monarchy doesn't fall through coups, it falls through exhaustion. That exhaustion has been visible in headlines for years. The constant back and forth of accusations and apologies, privacy pleas followed by public interviews, charity speeches undercut by commercial deals, it all blurred together. Eventually, the question wasn't who was right, but who was left to believe in the crown. As the session in Parliament dragged on, one backbencher made a remark that reportedly silenced the entire chamber. "We cannot allow titles to be used as shields for personal profit," she said, reading from her notes. "Nor can we allow the monarchy to become a brand war." Those words hit hard, not only because of their truth, but because they echoed what so many Britons had quietly thought for years. The House erupted in agreement, and the motion gained momentum. Within hours, the tally was clear, the majority was in favor. The wheels of royal justice were turning. But there's something deeply human beneath the politics. A father, a son, and a daughter-in-law caught in a web of power, pride, and pain. A nation torn between loyalty and resentment. The image of Harry and Meghan as young lovers on the palace balcony has faded into one of courtroom hearings, legal threats, and mutual silence. The fairy tale is over, and in its place stands a constitutional reckoning. Outside Westminster, royal supporters gathered with flags, chants, and mixed emotions. Some waved Union Jacks in triumph. Others cried quietly, holding up old photos of Harry in uniform. A woman told a reporter, "We loved him once. We wanted to love him again, but he left us first." Her voice trembled as she spoke. That quote would go viral by nightfall. And through all of it, one question keeps returning. What will King Charles do now? Because while Parliament's motion holds immense weight, the monarchy's survival depends on the king's decision. Will he sign the approval and cement history? Or will he find a last-minute compromise, one that spares his son but risks his own credibility? In the days ahead, the world will find out. But one thing is certain, the era of royal immunity is ending. The public no longer accepts silence as strength. The monarchy is being forced to evolve, to prove that loyalty and privilege are not interchangeable. And at the center of it all are two names that once embodied hope, now symbols of controversy. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Because just as Parliament prepared to announce its decision, a confidential document surfaced. One that could change how we see everything that happened behind the scenes. It wasn't leaked by a journalist or a rival MP. It came from someone much closer to the royal circle, someone who knows exactly how deep this goes. And what that document revealed would make even the most loyal royal supporters question everything they thought they knew about the monarchy, about King Charles, and about what truly led to this historic decision. Because this wasn't just about titles anymore. It was about revenge, betrayal, and a secret promise made years ago, a promise now broken in front of the world. What was in that document? Who leaked it? And how does King Charles really feel about erasing his own son's royal identity? The answers are coming, and they'll change everything we thought we knew about the modern monarchy. Because this isn't just a royal scandal. It's the beginning of a royal reckoning. And what happens next will shake Buckingham Palace to its very core. It began with a single line read aloud in a room that has witnessed centuries of power, betrayal, and reform. This house proposes that the titles of Duke and Duchess of Sussex be revoked in accordance with the Royal Titles Act. The chamber fell silent. You could hear the faint echo of the speaker's gavel, the rustle of papers, and the collective intake of breath that followed. No one dared whisper. For a few seconds, even the clocks in Westminster seemed to tick more loudly, as if time itself was holding its breath. That was the moment Britain realized this wasn't gossip anymore. It wasn't tabloid chatter or another round of royal rumors. It was official business. Parliament, the heart of British democracy, was moving against its own prince. And for the first time in living memory, the question of royal titles wasn't being discussed in secret behind palace gates. It was on the record, televised, and set to divide the nation. How did it come to this? How did two people once celebrated as the future of a modern, inclusive monarchy become the center of a constitutional earthquake? The truth is, it wasn't one moment. It was a slow, relentless build-up. Each controversy chipped at the marble of royal respectability until cracks began to show. Interviews that painted the palace as cold and uncaring. Books that aired family secrets. Deals that blurred the line between royal service and self-promotion. And then, the final straw, a government-funded survey revealing that more than 60% of Britons believed Harry and Meghan should be stripped of their royal status altogether. That statistic hit Westminster like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, this wasn't about family drama. It was about national identity. What does it mean to be royal in the 21st century? Can you reject royal duty, yet keep royal privilege? One MP stood up during that first session and asked, if the monarchy is about service, why are the Sussexes profiting from it? His question drew murmurs of approval from across the aisle. But let's rewind a bit, because this moment didn't come out of nowhere. A few weeks earlier, an anonymous insider had circulated a memo titled The Sussex Dilemma. It wasn't an official document, but it carried weight. The memo argued that continued use of royal titles by individuals no longer performing royal duties undermined the credibility of the crown. It was blunt, almost brutal, and it landed on the desks of key MPs from both major parties. Within days, it had been shared, debated, and quietly endorsed by several who believed the monarchy needed to draw a line. Then came the whisper that changed everything. A senior aide from Clarence House was seen entering a private meeting with a prominent Conservative MP. No notes, no press, no leaks. But hours later, that same MP submitted a request for a special parliamentary discussion regarding royal titles and constitutional accountability. That was the first public hint that something massive was coming. The morning of the session, London felt different. The skies hung gray and heavy over the Thames. Reporters lined the steps of Westminster like soldiers before battle. News anchors spoke with the kind of rehearsed calm that hides pure adrenaline. You could sense the tension, the gravity, the sheer historic weight of what was about to happen. Britain doesn't touch royal titles lightly. The last time Parliament interfered with a title this high-ranking was during the aftermath of Edward VIII's abdication in 1936. The echoes of that scandal still reverberated in history books. Inside the chamber, the speaker's voice broke through the murmuring crowd. Order! Order! The House will now consider the motion on the status of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The words themselves felt surreal. It was as though centuries of royal insulation had cracked, letting the public in to witness the raw machinery of monarchy meeting democracy. The first MP to speak was Sir Jonathan Rhys, a calm, composed figure with decades of experience. He began, "This is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of clarity." The line immediately trended online. Rhys argued that the titles had become a commercial brand, detached from royal service and used for purposes inconsistent with the dignity of the crown. His tone was firm but not malicious, more like a disappointed teacher addressing two former students. "You cannot have the privileges of royalty without the responsibilities," he said. "Titles are not souvenirs to be taken abroad." Across the aisle, some disagreed. One younger MP from Manchester stood up and defended Harry and Meghan's right to forge their own path, arguing that the monarchy needed to modernize and accept independence without punishment. It was a rare moment of sympathy, but even she admitted, the issue here is not freedom. It's representation. They chose to represent themselves, not the crown. By midday, the session had turned emotional. References to Queen Elizabeth's legacy filled the speeches. Some MPs reminded the chamber of her patience, her quiet discipline, her refusal to retaliate even when tested. The contrast between her stoic reign and the Sussexes' media ventures was impossible to ignore. "We're not stripping anyone of dignity," one MP said. "We're restoring the dignity of the monarchy itself." And while this debate raged in Parliament, cameras outside captured the crowd swelling. Protesters clashed verbally, Team Sussex versus Team Monarchy. Placards read, "Let them be," and "Not my king." But for every voice defending the couple, two more called for accountability. The national mood had shifted. People weren't just angry, they felt betrayed. Let's be honest, Britain has always loved a royal rebel. But rebellion has a time limit. Diana's defiance was seen as courage. Harry and Meghan's has become fatigue. What began as a fight for freedom morphed into what many saw as a campaign for fame. That's the emotional undercurrent Parliament couldn't ignore. Because every monarchy, at its core, survives on perception. And perception had turned. By the late afternoon, the debate had taken on a colder tone. Historical parallels were drawn to the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, which stripped German princes of their British titles during World War I. "We have precedent," said another MP, "and while this situation is different, the principle remains. Titles must reflect loyalty." The House murmured in uneasy agreement. Reporters began leaking snippets of the speeches online. Twitter exploded with the hashtag Royal Reckoning. Major news networks interrupted programming for live updates. Every word, every sentence spoken inside Parliament became part of a real-time global conversation. The world was watching Britain rewrite royal boundaries. And somewhere, deep within Buckingham Palace, aides were reportedly gathered in a private drawing room, watching the debate unfold on muted television screens. One witness described the atmosphere as tense, funereal, like a family watching its own portrait burn. Then came the final speech before the preliminary vote, a fiery statement from Lady Caroline Whitmore, a long-serving MP known for her sharp wit. "Let's stop pretending this is about politics," she said. "This is about principle. You cannot reject the institution and still profit from its name. It's like resigning from Parliament and still calling yourself an MP." The chamber erupted in applause. Even her political opponents nodded subtly. It was the kind of speech that sticks to history like glue. By 5 p.m., the Speaker announced that the preliminary motion would move forward to formal drafting. The motion had passed its first hurdle. That meant one thing. Parliament was officially endorsing the process to remove Harry and Meghan's royal titles. It wasn't done yet, but it was happening. Outside, the crowd roared, not in celebration, but in shock. Some cried, others cheered. One reporter described it as the strangest sound, half triumph, half heartbreak. Meanwhile, royal insiders claim that King Charles received the briefing that same evening. The document, delivered in a sealed envelope marked urgent, outlined Parliament's intent and potential implications for the monarchy. Charles reportedly read it twice, then set it down quietly, saying only, "So it begins." That moment, though brief, captured everything. A father's grief, a king's burden, a nation's decision. The House of Windsor had weathered wars, scandals, and divorces, but never had it been forced to confront its own within the walls of Parliament. But here's where things get even stranger. Because while Parliament's motion was making waves across Britain, an unexpected voice was preparing to enter the debate, one that would shift the entire conversation from politics to something far more personal. Someone inside the palace, someone who had once defended Harry and Meghan, was about to break their silence. And when they did, their words would ignite a firestorm that no royal spin doctor could contain. What did they reveal? And why did they choose that exact moment to speak out? Because the truth behind this motion wasn't just about constitutional rules or royal decorum. It was about something much deeper, something that had been festering behind the palace gates for years. And once it came out, there would be no going back. The monarchy would never be the same again. When the envelope landed on King Charles's desk, there was no fanfare, no trumpets, no ceremonial pageantry, just the quiet, almost oppressive stillness of Clarence House in the late afternoon, the muted hum of staff moving about in the background, and the soft rustle of paper as his aides withdrew politely. Inside that sealed document lay the culmination of weeks of political maneuvering, public debate, and media scrutiny. Parliament's motion to strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles, pending the king's approval. Charles didn't open it immediately. He stared at the envelope as if it were a living thing, heavy with consequences. There was history in that weight. History he had carried for decades, watching the monarchy bend and shift under pressures both external and internal. He had been groomed his entire life for duty, for the responsibility of preserving the crown, and now the test was here, more personal and more painful than anything he could have anticipated. He finally broke the seal. Inside were copies of the motion, detailed votes from Parliament, legal opinions from Crown solicitors, and a private advisory note outlining potential fallout. One line caught his attention immediately. Public sentiment overwhelmingly favors the removal of titles. Delay could damage the monarchy irreparably. His hand trembled slightly. It wasn't fear of authority. It was the profound conflict of heart and duty. Because Charles's duty was clear, as sovereign, he was the final arbiter. No law could be enacted without his signature. Yet the personal cost of signing weighed on him. This was his son, the same boy who had once clutched his hand at Balmoral, who had played in the gardens of Sandringham, who had laughed at family jokes long past his age. And now, the adult man before him, far away in California, was about to have his royal identity legally erased. According to insiders, Charles spent hours pacing the private corridors of Clarence House. The gardens outside, quiet and gray, reflected his inner turmoil. Aides gave him privacy, knowing better than to interfere. Some suggested drafting a statement to soften the blow. Others proposed delaying the final approval. But Charles, in his characteristic blend of caution and decisiveness, seemed neither convinced nor comforted. He understood the weight of precedent and the danger of hesitation. He picked up a photo from his desk, one of Harry at the age of 7, running across the lawn during a summer gathering. The boy in the photo was unburdened by titles, privileges, or public expectation. That image clashed violently with the one now painted in Parliament and the media, a man accused of turning royal privilege into personal gain, a man whose every move abroad seemed to court controversy and public scrutiny. Could a father reconcile the boy he loved with the man whose actions jeopardized the monarchy? The palace staff reported that his phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from senior advisors, close friends, and even Prince William's aides began filtering in, each with advice, warnings, or pleas. Remember the crown, one aide is said to have whispered. Remember the people. But what about the son? What about the relationship that had already been strained by distance, media battles, and past betrayals? The king's mind raced with impossible questions, the kind that had no simple answer. Behind the doors of his private chambers, Charles drafted and discarded multiple statements. Each read like a compromise he couldn't morally make. One version expressed regret at the necessity of the decision while emphasizing the importance of duty and public trust. Another framed it as a legal formality designed to appear neutral. Every draft failed. None could reconcile the duality of his role, monarch and father. During these moments, Camilla, queen consort, reportedly remained a quiet but significant presence. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the pressures Charles faced. Sources suggest she offered guidance not with emotion, but with strategy. The monarchy survives on perception, she reportedly said. Our son may not understand now, but history will judge the institution, not the individual. Her words, calm yet piercing, carried a weight Charles could not ignore. They were a reminder that family loyalty and monarchical duty were not always aligned. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, rumors were already swirling. Reporters, alerted by subtle palace activity, speculated that the king was about to take unprecedented action. Social media exploded with conjecture, from conspiracy theories to heartfelt pleas for mercy. Public sentiment was divided. Some called for Charles to exercise leniency. Others demanded firm action. Each post, each comment, became another invisible hand tugging at the king's conscience. Even more pressing was the knowledge that Harry and Meghan's global influence extended beyond Britain. Interviews, documentaries, and streaming deals meant that any royal rebuke would be amplified internationally. This was not just a domestic issue, it was a global spectacle. Charles knew that the eyes of millions, if not billions, were on him. Every decision, every word, would be scrutinized, debated, and remembered. The king reportedly requested additional briefings on legal precedent, consulting documents dating back to Edward VIII and even the 1917 Titles Deprivation Act. History, however, offered little solace. Previous cases involved abdications or wartime dispossessions, circumstances far removed from a modern, self-imposed exile. There were no clear rules for a son who had chosen independence, profited internationally, and yet remained bound by his birthright. Charles was being asked to create a modern precedent with his signature. As evening descended, aides noted a subtle shift in the king's demeanor. His face, usually composed, appeared drawn and fatigued. He made few decisions, yet each seemed deliberate, measured, and thoughtful. One aide described him standing by the window, looking out at the city, muttering, "Duty first, family second, always duty." That phrase encapsulated the impossible tension between personal desire and constitutional obligation. And then came the call from Prince William. It was brief, formal, and strategic. William reportedly framed the discussion around safeguarding the monarchy and ensuring institutional integrity. Charles listened, weighed the advice, and nodded silently. The conversation, though short, reportedly solidified a critical understanding. This decision could not be avoided, postponed, or softened without risking long-term damage. The monarchy was at a crossroads, and indecision would be catastrophic. Yet, for all the strategic clarity, the emotional cost remained. Charles, as a father, had to grapple with the reality that his son would soon see his royal status revoked on paper and in public. The king's aides observed him retreat to his private study late at night, rifling through old letters from Harry, personal notes from Diana, and photographs of family gatherings. The juxtaposition was stark. Memories of innocence and joy contrasted against the storm of contemporary scandal. Could he, the man tasked with preserving history, erase part of it in front of the world? Reports from palace insiders suggest that by midnight, the king had made a tentative personal decision. He would approve Parliament's motion, but with a measured public statement emphasizing duty, unity, and the enduring value of the monarchy. Even this decision, however, was tinged with sorrow. Approving the removal of Harry and Meghan's titles meant acknowledging that personal bonds had been overshadowed by institutional necessity. It was an act of governance, not vengeance, yet it felt both. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because just as Charles prepared to finalize his decision, an unexpected message arrived from London. A confidential document, leaked from within Parliament itself, detailing private communications between MPs and palace insiders. The content suggested that some advisors had quietly lobbied for the king to act swiftly, even while publicly maintaining neutrality. The revelation was explosive, and it threatened to turn the palace's careful discretion into a media maelstrom. Charles reportedly reviewed the document in silence. He understood immediately that the narrative he controlled could slip entirely out of his hands. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and the world would see not a measured king, but a man complicit in family ruin. Yet he also knew that delaying action would allow Parliament to frame him as weak, indecisive, or even sympathetic to the very people the nation now questioned. The stakes were monumental. Inside Clarence House, aides whispered, "The decision is now irreversible once it's announced." But Charles, despite the centuries of royal tradition guiding him, recognized an uncomfortable truth. Even as sovereign, he was caught between history and humanity. Every title removed, every privilege rescinded, would be a scar, both on the monarchy and on his family. And somewhere across the ocean, Harry and Meghan remained unaware of the full scope of the unfolding drama. For them, the narrative had always been about independence, privacy, and controlling the story. But Charles's private deliberations, informed by centuries of duty and strategic foresight, were about to render those plans irrelevant. Because what comes next is not just a story of a king deciding on titles. It is a story of a father, a monarch, and a nation confronting the impossible, balancing love, duty, and legacy in the harsh glare of history. And when the decision is finally announced, the world will see not just a procedural act, but a seismic shift in the British monarchy, one that will reverberate for generations. What did Charles ultimately decide in those quiet hours? Who inside the palace influenced him most? And when the public announcement comes, will it bring closure or ignite a new wave of scandal? Because the story behind closed doors is only just beginning to, it wasn't just a debate about royal titles. It was a war of influence, strategy, and personal vendettas disguised as constitutional concern. By the time the motion to strip Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles reached Parliament, it had become clear this was bigger than one couple. It was about power, precedent, and the message the monarchy was sending to the public. The motion began quietly, almost innocuously. A few MPs, long frustrated with the Sussexes' independence, had drafted a procedural note, initially intended for internal discussion. They argued that the continued use of royal titles by individuals who had resigned from active royal duty undermined the Crown's authority. At first, the note seemed like a minor bureaucratic detail, until it caught the attention of influential parliamentarians who saw the potential to push it into the public sphere. One of the key figures behind the push was Sir Jonathan Rhys, the Conservative MP who had a reputation for blending sharp intellect with theatrical timing. His motives were complex, part political strategy, part personal conviction. He reportedly believed that allowing Harry and Meghan to maintain their titles while engaging in global media ventures set a dangerous precedent. The monarchy cannot survive if titles are mere commodities, he told colleagues in a closed meeting, according to sources. The language was calculated, cold, almost clinical, yet it resonated. Behind the scenes, a coalition of MPs began to form. Some were motivated by genuine concern for the Crown. Others had long-standing grievances with the Sussexes, citing past media confrontations, charitable disputes, and alleged breaches of protocol. They quietly lobbied colleagues across party lines, framing the issue as one of constitutional importance. It's not personal, one MP reportedly said. It's about accountability. But politics rarely allows for pure altruism. Ambition, rivalry, and the desire to be remembered as defenders of the monarchy played a role. Interestingly, the push also included younger MPs from urban districts. Surprising, given the common perception that younger politicians tend to be more progressive. Yet their involvement stemmed from a unique concern: public perception. Surveys had revealed that a majority of citizens, particularly in England and Wales, believed Harry and Meghan had misused royal privilege. This wasn't about partisan politics. It was about political survival. MPs feared that ignoring public sentiment would alienate voters and provoke media outrage. The coalition worked methodically. Whispers became briefings. Briefings became internal memos. Within weeks, the motion had been drafted, vetted by legal experts, and quietly endorsed by influential party leaders. It was designed to appear procedural, yet its implications were anything but routine. Once the motion was read aloud in Parliament, there would be no turning back. Sources reveal that some of the MPs pushing for title removal had personal stakes in the debate. One veteran member of Parliament reportedly held deep resentment toward Meghan due to past public criticism of her charitable work. Another was said to harbor animosity toward Harry for perceived slights during previous royal engagements. These personal motives were carefully masked under layers of parliamentary decorum, but insiders suggest they fueled the urgency and intensity of the campaign. What made this push particularly potent was timing. The debate coincided with a period of heightened media scrutiny. News outlets were running stories on Harry and Meghan's business ventures, travel schedules, and public appearances. Social media campaigns amplified public dissatisfaction. MPs recognized a rare alignment. The stars of public opinion, media pressure, and legislative timing had converged. To delay the motion would be politically risky. To act swiftly, however, would demonstrate authority and decisiveness. The coalition also leveraged historical precedent. References to the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917 were cited in speeches, drawing parallels between revocation of titles for wartime disloyalty and the modern-day scenario of perceived dereliction of duty. This historical framing lent legitimacy to their argument. Parliament was not punishing individuals arbitrarily. It was upholding centuries of tradition designed to protect the Crown. Behind closed doors, advisors in Westminster reportedly briefed the King's office. These briefings were delicate. Any suggestion that Parliament was forcing the King's hand could be construed as overreach. Yet the documents indicated that if Charles failed to approve the motion, public trust in the monarchy could erode further. For MPs, this was leverage. For Charles, it was a reminder of the delicate balance between personal emotion and constitutional duty. Another layer to consider: media strategy. Parliament had learned from the Sussexes' mastery of media narratives. The coalition coordinated with press contacts to ensure that the debate and eventual vote would dominate headlines. Leaks of draft speeches, selective quotes, and timing of press releases were all orchestrated to maximize public engagement. The goal was clear: make the narrative inescapable, framing the title revocation as both legal necessity and moral imperative. Yet, not all voices in Parliament supported the motion. Opposition MPs raised concerns about precedent, fairness, and potential backlash. One member questioned whether stripping titles could be perceived as punitive, arguing that the monarchy should evolve to accommodate independent members without resorting to public humiliation. These arguments were noted, but they ultimately lacked the weight to derail the motion. The coalition had anticipated dissent and built a broad base of support, ensuring momentum would not falter. The dynamics within Parliament mirrored those of a chess game. Each move, each speech, each vote was calculated to advance the coalition's objectives while neutralizing opposition. MPs circulated talking points emphasizing the importance of institutional integrity, public trust, and historical consistency. The narrative was carefully constructed. Harry and Meghan were not being targeted personally. Rather, they were emblematic of challenges that threatened the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, the pressure inside the palace intensified. Charles reportedly received regular updates from advisors, each outlining the growing support for title revocation within Parliament. One confidential note emphasized that if the motion succeeded, the king's approval would be seen as necessary validation. A refusal or delay could be interpreted as weakness, potentially destabilizing both the monarchy and public confidence. Interestingly, the coalition also relied on subtle public cues. Opinion polls, letters from constituents, and social media engagement were meticulously tracked. MPs cited these data points in speeches, creating the perception of overwhelming public support. "We act not out of malice, but because the people demand it," one MP declared during debate. Whether this was entirely true or a strategic framing, it added weight to the motion. Sources indicate that by the time the vote approached, the coalition had anticipated every possible counterargument. Legal experts, historians, and constitutional scholars were prepared to testify, if necessary. Opposition voices, though vocal, were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The motion had become inevitable, not because of brute force, but because the groundwork had been laid with precision, timing, and insight into both public and royal sensitivities. But here's the twist. Even as Parliament moved forward, there were whispers of internal palace dissent. Some aides believed that certain senior figures were subtly undermining the motion, leaking information to sympathetic journalists, or encouraging the king to resist. These internal conflicts created tension between the monarchy and the legislature, adding complexity to an already combustible situation. By the night before the preliminary vote, the coalition celebrated quiet victories. They had united disparate MPs under a single cause, aligned timing with media coverage, and built a historical and moral rationale that was hard to dispute. Parliament was ready to act, and the king, for all his private hesitation, had few viable alternatives. And yet, even with all the strategy, the suspense was palpable. Because when the motion finally passed and Charles signed the approval, the story wouldn't end with a procedural act. The aftermath would explode across media channels, social networks, and private conversations within the royal family. Who leaked the confidential insider information? Who was pushing Charles hardest from within? And when Parliament finally made the announcement, how would the world react to the king executing this unprecedented act? The answers to these questions would not come immediately, but what did happen next would ensure that the name Sussex would forever be tied to a moment of constitutional drama, family tension, and a public spectacle that no one could ignore. It was meant to be inspirational. A message of empowerment, of hope, of progress. Meghan Markle, ever the media-savvy former actress turned royal influencer, had prepared a speech for a charity event in New York, one she thought would cement her image as a modern leader a woman bridging the gap between celebrity and service. She spoke with poise, confidence, and that unmistakable charisma that once captivated the world on her wedding day. But within hours, what was intended as inspiration became a catalyst for upheaval. The speech was streamed online, covered live by multiple news outlets, and dissected by commentators within minutes. Meghan spoke of redefining legacy and rejecting outdated symbols that no longer serve the people. At first glance, the rhetoric seemed harmless. Empowerment, feminism, social justice, themes she had long championed. But the wording carried undertones, subtle yet deliberate, that many interpreted as a critique of the monarchy itself. Words like rigid structures, ancient traditions, and oppressive norms were read by palace insiders as veiled criticisms of her own family's institution. Immediately, Parliament reacted. Members across party lines began referencing the speech in private briefings, noting how it seemed to underscore a central argument, that Harry and Meghan had voluntarily distanced themselves from duty while benefiting from titles and privileges. She didn't just speak to the world, one MP reportedly said. She spoke to us, and we heard the challenge loud and clear. Media coverage amplified every nuance. Headlines ranged from admiration, Meghan Markle inspires millions, to condemnation, royal family criticized by their own daughter-in-law. Social media users dissected her every phrase, creating viral threads and heated debates. Critics argued that Meghan was positioning herself as untouchable, as if she could criticize the monarchy without consequence. Supporters argued she was simply being honest, advocating for modern values. But one thing was undeniable. The speech shifted the conversation from private disputes to public, political action. Back in Westminster, MPs held emergency discussions. Senior figures reportedly circulated transcripts of Meghan's speech to colleagues, highlighting phrases that could be framed as undermining royal duty. A motion was already in progress, but now it gained urgency. According to insiders, the speech tipped the scales for several wavering parliamentarians. The argument was no longer theoretical. It was now a tangible example of why the titles could no longer be held without consequence. The King's office, meanwhile, monitored the fallout with a mixture of concern and resolve. Advisors noted the rapid-fire media response and potential public backlash if perceived leniency was shown. Charles reportedly remarked in private that Meghan had engineered the timing perfectly, whether intentionally or not. Her speech, delivered thousands of miles away, had rippled across oceans to influence the very halls of British power. Even within Harry and Meghan's own circle, reactions were intense. Close friends praised the speech for its courage and clarity. Others worried it would provoke exactly the kind of political storm no royal family member could withstand. Some described the moment as walking into a minefield blindfolded, acknowledging that while the content was admirable in its ambition, the timing and context could not have been worse for the Sussexes' standing. What makes this moment critical is that Meghan's words were not just philosophical musings. They were strategically visible. She knew the cameras, the microphones, the social media algorithms. Every line was amplified, every phrase dissected. And for Parliament, this provided the perfect case study. Here was evidence, public and undeniable, that the Duke and Duchess were not merely disengaged from royal duty. They were actively crafting a narrative that challenged its authority. The reaction inside Buckingham Palace was one of quiet alarm. Charles reportedly reviewed the speech multiple times, consulting aides on potential interpretations and long-term ramifications. Legal advisors were brought in to assess whether any of her statements could influence ongoing parliamentary actions or contractual obligations. Every word was scrutinized, every nuance weighed, and through it all, the king's private struggle intensified. This was his son's wife, a woman he had once welcomed as part of the family, and yet she had unknowingly or intentionally delivered the spark that could ignite a constitutional crisis. Public opinion was equally volatile. Polls conducted within 24 hours showed an uptick in favorability for title removal. Citizens who had previously supported the Sussexes now expressed skepticism. The argument that Meghan's speech demonstrated detachment from royal responsibility became a headline narrative, when independence becomes defiance. Social media influencers, journalists, and late-night commentators dissected every phrase. Public debate raged on Reddit, Twitter, and Facebook, fracturing traditional loyalties and fueling a national conversation on monarchy, accountability, and celebrity influence. Interestingly, the speech also affected internal palace dynamics. Sources indicate that senior aides and courtiers began preparing for rapid escalation. Some suggested issuing clarifying statements or engaging in damage control through controlled media interactions. Others advised patience, noting that any overreaction could backfire spectacularly. This division revealed the delicate balance of power inside the monarchy: diplomacy and discretion versus necessity and enforcement. By the evening, the political push had intensified. MPs referenced Meghan's speech repeatedly in debates, using her own words to illustrate the need for decisive action. One conservative backbencher reportedly said, "When they distance themselves from duty and criticize the institution, they cannot be allowed to hold on to its symbols." The chamber erupted in applause, signaling that the motion had gained both moral and political legitimacy. But the drama didn't stop there. Leaks of private communications suggested that some palace insiders were quietly sympathetic to Parliament's position. These leaks created tension and suspicion within Clarence House, who had authorized the sharing of internal assessments with lawmakers. Were these actions strategic or the result of rogue advisors anticipating history in the making? Charles reportedly understood that these subtle shifts could influence his own deliberations. Every leak, every whispered commentary, every leaked transcript could affect his decision-making process. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan reportedly reveled in the positive spin of her speech, completely unaware of the full scope of its consequences in Britain. Close aides told reporters that she viewed it as a continuation of her public mission: advocacy, visibility, and influence. She had no way of knowing that each carefully chosen word was now being weaponized in Westminster, shaping the path toward a historic revocation of her royal privileges. In private correspondence, Harry was said to be supportive, framing the speech as a bold statement of principle. Yet insiders suggest he also harbored unease about the backlash. The Duke understood that Parliament was watching closely and that public opinion could shift rapidly. He reportedly warned Meghan about potential consequences, but his words were drowned out by the momentum of her visibility. By the time the next parliamentary session convened, Meghan's speech had already become a pivotal talking point. Committee members cited it in speeches, press releases referenced it, and news networks amplified the controversy with round-the-clock coverage. The speech had done something unexpected. It had moved the motion from procedural discussion to moral imperative, giving MPs the language and the justification they needed to act decisively. The impact of Meghan's words also highlighted a larger tension within modern monarchy: the collision between media-driven influence and centuries-old protocols. Royal titles were once ceremonial, tied to lineage and duty. In the age of global media, however, they had become performative, subject to public scrutiny, social commentary, and personal branding. Meghan had unwittingly demonstrated that a royal voice, amplified internationally, could directly affect governance. Even within Charles's inner circle, discussions about the speech were ongoing. Some aides believed it provided clarity, illustrating why action was necessary to preserve the integrity of the monarchy. Others worried about public perception, fearing that the king would be seen as punitive or controlling. Charles, for his part, reportedly remained silent for long stretches, processing the multifaceted implications. His choice would not only determine the fate of Harry and Meghan, but could redefine the boundaries of royal authority in the modern era. And as night fell over London, the consequences of that single speech became undeniable. Parliament had the evidence, the moral justification, and the momentum. The king had the weight of history, duty, and personal emotion pressing upon him. And the world, wide awake and watching, began to understand that this was not just a story about two individuals. It was about the collision of modern media, public accountability, and centuries of tradition. But just as the implications of the speech were settling, a confidential communication arrived at Westminster, a note from an insider within the royal circle, hinting at private discussions that would completely shift the narrative. The contents were explosive: leaked strategy documents, internal communications, and whispers of secret alliances that no one outside the palace should have known about. What secrets did these documents hold? Who inside the palace was feeding Parliament, and for what purpose? And how would the revelation of this inner machination change the course of the motion to strip royal titles? Because Meghan's words had lit the spark, but the fire was about to leap in directions no one could have anticipated. It didn't take long for the shockwaves of Meghan's speech and Parliament's motion to reach the public consciousness. By the following morning, social media was ablaze with hashtags, opinion polls, and heated debates. Hashtag Royal Reckoning, hashtag Sussex Titles, and hashtag King Charles Decision trended within hours. Every news outlet, from the Times to CNN, carried the story, framing it as both a constitutional debate and a human drama. For a monarchy that relied on public favor as much as ceremonial pomp, the stakes could not have been higher. Polling data confirmed what insiders already suspected. A survey conducted by a major UK research firm revealed that more than 60% of respondents believed Harry and Meghan should lose their royal titles. That figure was remarkable not only in its scale, but in its speed. Public sentiment had shifted dramatically in a matter of weeks. Analysts speculated that the combination of media coverage, the speech, and decades of perceived disengagement from duty contributed to the tidal wave of disapproval. Even those who had previously admired the couple's independence now questioned their loyalty to the institution. It wasn't just numbers on a chart. It was a tangible, emotional reaction. Town halls in Manchester, Leeds, and London saw ordinary citizens debating passionately. One elderly woman, clutching a Union Jack, told a reporter they wanted freedom, so they left. But freedom without responsibility? That's not loyalty. That's betrayal. Meanwhile, younger citizens took to Twitter and TikTok, crafting memes and commentary that distilled complex constitutional arguments into sharp, shareable soundbites. The monarchy, it seemed, was being judged not just by historians, but by millions of online voices, each eager to have their say. The pressure on Parliament was immediate. MPs who had previously been cautious now felt empowered. They could point to these public expressions of sentiment as validation for their motion. In private briefings, party leaders highlighted the polls, emphasizing that failing to act would appear as if Parliament was ignoring the people's voice. In a political system that relies heavily on public perception, ignoring this wave of opinion was impossible. Protests began to emerge, both in support of and against the Sussexes. In London's Trafalgar Square, crowds gathered with placards reading, "Let them be," and "Titles are earned, not inherited." The scene was chaotic, with chants, speeches, and media crews vying to capture the energy of the moment. Some demonstrators had traveled from across the country, drawn not only by loyalty but by curiosity, a desire to witness history unfold. The atmosphere was a strange mix of carnival and courtroom, spectacle and solemnity. Inside Westminster, MPs debated not just the motion itself, but its timing. Public opinion had become a sword hanging over the process. Delay could be interpreted as weakness or indecision. Speed, however, risked backlash from those who viewed the action as punitive or unfair. The coalition pushing for the revocation leveraged every data point, every public sentiment measure, to argue for immediate action. They framed it as a response to the people, a necessary step to preserve trust in the monarchy. Royal historians weighed in, emphasizing that the monarchy had always depended on public approval. Unlike other institutions, the crown's power is largely symbolic. Its strength comes from legitimacy, tradition, and the consent of the governed. If the public perception faltered, the monarchy's very foundation could be threatened. In this light, Parliament's motion was not merely punitive, it was preventative, a preemptive measure to safeguard centuries of stability. The media frenzy added another layer of complexity. News outlets dissected the speech, the motion, and the polling data in real time. Opinion pieces debated whether Harry and Meghan were victims of outdated institutions or architects of their own downfall. Talk shows ran segments analyzing the implications of title revocation, inviting experts, former royals, and social commentators. Each segment increased the pressure, reinforcing the narrative that public sentiment demanded decisive action. Within Buckingham Palace, advisors closely monitored these developments. Polling data and media coverage were reviewed daily. One aide reportedly remarked, "The public has decided, whether we like it or not." Charles, absorbing these insights, reportedly understood that the monarchy's survival required not only legal compliance, but alignment with the collective mood of the nation. This wasn't simply about his family. It was about history, perception, and legitimacy. Social media platforms became arenas of debate, with videos, memes, and threads dissecting every nuance. Influencers and commentators weighed in on Meghan's intent, Harry's responses, and the monarchy's position. Viral content amplified every minor detail, making it impossible for palace communications to control the narrative fully. The public, empowered by access to information and platforms, effectively became an unofficial arbiter of royal decisions. Even celebrities joined the conversation, inadvertently fueling further scrutiny. Some offered support for Harry and Meghan, framing the issue as a story of personal freedom and injustice. Others criticized the couple, arguing that privilege without duty is not loyalty, and that the monarchy deserves protection. Every endorsement or critique added fuel to the fire, making it increasingly difficult for any side to dominate the narrative entirely. Protests also escalated in intensity. Supporters of the title revocation organized marches, coordinated chants, and distributed flyers outlining constitutional arguments. Their goal was to demonstrate tangible public backing for Parliament's motion, putting additional pressure on both lawmakers and the king. Opposing groups, meanwhile, focused on framing the revocation as a moral injustice, emphasizing the human element and the perceived cruelty of stripping someone of a lifelong identity. The tension between these groups mirrored the deeper cultural debate over tradition versus modernity, duty versus personal freedom. The stakes were further complicated by international attention. Media outlets in the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond followed the story closely. The Sussexes' celebrity status meant that global opinion could not be ignored. Commentators in foreign countries speculated on the implications for the monarchy, democracy, and the balance between private life and public duty. The story transcended national borders, highlighting the increasingly complex dynamics between celebrity, politics, and public perception in the 21st century. As public scrutiny intensified, Parliament moved quickly to solidify the motion. Emergency meetings were held, legal reviews conducted, and press strategy coordinated to ensure that the debate aligned with public sentiment. Every detail, from timing to phrasing, was meticulously calculated. The goal was to demonstrate that the action was not arbitrary but responsive, necessary, and supported by the will of the people. In parallel, Buckingham Palace faced its own internal reckoning. Advisors debated how to frame the king's eventual approval, balancing the need for constitutional compliance with the human impact on Harry and Meghan. Charles reportedly struggled with the personal ramifications, knowing that his decision would permanently alter his relationship with his son. Yet the pressure from public opinion and political momentum left him with little room for indecision. By the time Parliament was ready to advance the motion, the alignment of public sentiment, political strategy, and media amplification created a near-perfect storm. Polls, protests, and online debates had collectively ensured that indecision would be viewed as weakness. The king, the lawmakers, and the public were all watching and waiting for the moment when personal loyalty would be weighed against institutional necessity. And just as the session was about to convene, an unexpected leak emerged, a confidential internal poll showing not only broad support for title revocation, but also sharp criticism of palace indecision. The leak, presumably from a sympathetic insider, added pressure that could not be ignored. Suddenly, every actor in this drama realized that history was accelerating, moving faster than anyone could have anticipated. The public had spoken, Parliament was poised to act, and the king faced a decision that would define his reign. But while the nation debated, and while social media exploded, a single question loomed. How would Harry and Meghan respond once they understood the full force of public opinion and Parliament's intent? Because what happens when public sentiment turns against you, and the machinery of power aligns behind that judgment, is far more devastating than mere criticism. And in this case, the consequences were about to unfold in a way no one could predict. The stage was set, the tension was palpable, and what came next, the moment when Parliament's motion intersected with the king's approval, would change the course of royal history forever. Behind the grandeur of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House Where centuries of monarchy have played out in quiet corridors and gilded rooms, there exists a force rarely seen in public yet felt deeply in every decision. The influence of Camilla, Queen Consort. Often underestimated perhaps intentionally by the media and public alike, Camilla's presence in the unfolding crisis surrounding Harry and Meghan was subtle, calculated, and profound. While the world focused on Parliament's motion and the Sussexes' actions, she worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring that every piece of the puzzle aligned with the preservation of the monarchy.